Thank you so much, Shauna and Amanda. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Julia, and I work for NYEC. I've been here about a year and a half. I'm actually our Los Angeles-based staff member. I thought that I was muted, but it's just speaker view. So I live in California, and I work heavily, as Shauna mentioned, on a lot of the work that we do around mental health, as well as our membership experience, growing our membership, and what it looks like to be as part of the coalition. And then additionally, I work on our annual forum that's coming up. So I think my role today, I'll just give you sort of a background about NYEC, some of the projects that we've been doing over the last year or two, as well as upcoming ways to get involved in the coalition. And then I'll pass it over to Mimi, who is racing against the clock to be able to get off on camera and talk more about some of the work that we're doing around youth champion cities and some really cool national projects that we have going on. But I think it might be good to just kind of get started. Feel free to get off mute or to put it in the chat. If anybody who is familiar with NYEC, maybe in the chat, if you can just put if you've ever heard of NYEC, or say it out loud, raise your hand. Okay, so we might have a couple people most people are new to it. A few people have been versed in things going on in the coalition. If you've attended at least one annual forum or maybe one of our online workshops, maybe either put it in the chat, thumbs up, or put on your screen just so we can kind of get an idea. Okay, we have some friends of the LA Conservation Corps, of course. Amanda as well, a couple other people that I see, but it appears maybe the majority of you are new or don't know much about the coalition. So I'll just give a background to begin. NYEC has been around for about 45 years. We are a national membership organization comprised of primarily direct service organizations, local workforce boards, a couple of foundations, and some other intermediaries as well from across the country. We have a really awesome California presence, so we're happy to have you all here. We have tons of members in California, and as I mentioned, I live here as well, so happy to be with my people. And NYC is kind of comprised of 3 buckets. So we talk about it in categories of policy and advocacy, youth leadership, and capacity building. And I'll start with capacity building. For those who are part of the coalition, we do a number of projects that, we'll be talking about, including some of our place-based or grant-based work that we have going on. Some of that includes our work in the mental health space, justice-impacted youth, youth homelessness, and as well as other topic areas that we get involved in. I think that we might have some links that we can put in the chat, looking at some of the reports that we've been able to do, community practices as well. We also do bi-weekly workshops. So usually twice a month, we have workshops that are free to all of our coalition members to learn more about diverse topic areas across the board, and provide practitioners with some technical assistance as well. In addition to that, we also have our annual forum that we do every year. So this year it's coming up. It's going to be in Atlanta, Georgia, March 4th through 6th. And that's an opportunity to share best practices across a number of topic areas. I'll see if I can put in the chat so you can take a look at it. But we're going to be doing a lot of work this coming year looking at overcoming barriers. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, looking at housing, transportation, and other sorts of barriers that are common hurdles to youth employment. I'm going to put in the chat a link to our annual forum page, but other topic areas include policy responses to changing market, relentless outreach and strategies for re-engagement, intentional and equitable community supports for youth subpopulations, as well as building stronger ecosystems and also creating long-lasting and effective programs in order to increase your impact. Oh, thank you so much, Shauna. So that's just some of the capacity building components of being a part of the coalition. We're always sending out opportunities to get involved in focus groups, community practices, as well as other parts of our grant-based work. In terms of policy and advocacy, I know it was mentioned that we launched the National Alliance of Youth and Young Adult Advocates, along with a couple of partners at CLASP and the Aspen Institute, the Core Network, and I think I might be missing one organization. So be sure to check that out. We'll be having some more information coming out in the next couple of months regarding NYEC to really create a vision for the future or a solid vision for the future for opportunity youth, those who are out of school and out of work, 16 to 24. In terms of policy, you can also get involved in our policy committee, and that meets on a monthly basis. We also have a couple of subcommittees as well, so one on apprenticeship and a mental health subcommittee. It's a great way to kind of stay up to date on what's going on within youth workforce and the goals and strategies that we'd like to be able to accomplish. We just had our event in DC called Youth Days in DC, which was an inaugural event for really capturing and learning how to advocate on behalf of our communities across the country. And I think Mimi's going to talk a little bit more about some of the work that we did there. And there's always opportunities to meet with the Department of Labor at our DOL Askaways. So if you're interested in attending those, we have a monthly kind of listening session to be able to put in your questions ahead of time and hear from our friends at the DOL about, WIOA and questions that you might have in terms of the federal funding that you might get. And then finally, for our youth leadership opportunities, we are always trying to get young people involved. So at our annual forum, we have a youth action hour where young people can submit their passion project for a chance to get funded and receive a little bit of grant funding for their project that they're going on to help their community. We've had some really innovative concepts like podcasts, virtual food banks, and just a number of good things. It's a really great way to have youth voice be a presence at these types of events and the importance and recognize the importance of that. We have a youth advisory council that helps inform a lot of the work that we do and ensure that youth voice is always centered at the work here at the coalition. And then, of course, any of the work that we're doing, whether it's a focus group or a community of practice, we always reach out to our members to be able to make sure that young people are involved in some capacity and that their voice is heard. And anything that we do with young people is always a paid opportunity. So that's just a little bit of background. I know I probably talked a lot there about the things going on at NYEC. But if you are interested in learning more about how to be a part of the coalition, we do provide a lot of opportunity to get involved in different ways. So there's something for everybody. And I really recommend just kind of learning more about what might meet your needs and how to really connect with and network within NYEC. It's a great way to be able to highlight your voice, especially on the policy forefront, to make sure that your organization, your community is heard when we're talking more about some of the policy recommendations and meeting with folks throughout the country. I got to meet with one of our California legislators while we were in DC, so there's opportunities like that as well to get involved in. And I think, oh, Lauren, yes?
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation. And I took note that your mental behavioral health initiative would be really interesting to us. I work for a Sacramento Employment and Training Agency, and we have a very large grant, HRTP, that we are working with our partners, Sacramento County Office of Education on. And it's all around mental behavioral health. So I'm definitely
Oh, that's
interested in
awesome.
tapping into your knowledge base and your know.
Definitely. Well, that's a great segue because I was just going to talk a little bit about some of the work that we did in mental health. So maybe I could touch base with you. We're also, trying to always continue the work that we're doing around mental health. And so we have some visioning sessions coming up as well about that. So I'd love to connect. Last year, we deployed a national survey in partnership with the Department of Labor to be able to send out to organizations across the country that really is looking at their ability to identify and address the mental health needs of the youth that they serve. And unsurprisingly, um, there was not enough in terms of screening and monitoring the need for youth mental health needs. So there was definitely insufficient ability to address mental health needs. But in addition to that, just the identification alone. When it came to some of our key findings, we found that most of the respondents said that they did not have a process for screening and monitoring. So over half, it was 64% of our respondents said they didn't have any sort of process for screening or monitoring youth for their mental health needs. And 72% of those respondents didn't track if the youth receives any sort of mental health services. And so what we really found is that screening and process or screening and tracking mattered, and those that if they didn't have screening processes in place, 60% of the respondents estimated that over half of their youth had mental health needs. And majority of the respondents said that less than half of their youth can access services when they need them. But close to 90% of the respondents said they didn't have sufficient resources to deliver quality mental health services and training to their staff. And so those are just some of the major findings. Of course, when looking at the types of common mental health conditions, it was things like anxiety, depression, behavioral health disorders, generalized trauma, a little bit of PTSD, and in addition to some others. But our survey, which I think might be in the chat, and if it's not, I'll definitely put it in the chat, really found that when there was screening and tracking in place for providing to the youth, that it made a difference in how quickly that they were able to be seen. So if there was screening in place, they were seen immediately twice as much versus those who didn't have any sort of screening in place. And of course, when it came to barriers for youth mental health services, some of those barriers included things like not being comfortable, the youth not being comfortable with mental health services, transportation with a huge one. I think this really relates to some of the work that we'll be going into and looking at barriers to employment as well. They look really similar. That the wait time for mental health services was fairly long, and the ability or the availability of local services and funding of services was also some major issues that came up within this survey. We also looked at rural communities versus suburban and urban communities, and among those in rural areas, there was a greater preference for improved transportation, screening processes, and staff training to utilize those systems, and better access to things like telehealth services. And that was just in comparison to those suburban and urban communities. And then in addition to that, we also did 3 youth focus groups. So I was able to conduct those focus groups over the course of a month, and it was really a very impactful experience. And the youth often had similar responses to those who filled out the survey as well, when it came to the barriers um, that they were experiencing, whether it was transportation. Something that came up a lot was cultural barriers as well, looking both at like religion and ethnicity as some things that they were experiencing in terms of their parents' support to be able to access services. So that was something that was very interesting that came from the survey and the focus groups. But overall, in terms of what the recommendations and what NYEC hopes to kind of accomplish as next steps for that, is really looking at the ability to have a strong universal sort of screening and tracking system that people can use, and be able to utilize that, as well as looking at what types of supports respondents said would be most helpful. So in addition to screening and assessments, looking at in-house clinicians, flexible funding for transportation, staff training to work with cultural barriers, better screening tools, and of course, supporting staff who are experiencing vicarious trauma through working with youth. So that survey happened about a year ago, and so we've been in the next steps and processes to be able to kind of continue the efforts and supports based on what the respondents were saying.
Julia, I added Mimi to the spotlight, just so you know.
Oh, beautiful.
See?
That kind of wraps up, I think, the majority of what I plan to talk about. I know you'll kind of find in what Mimi discusses is that the barriers that we found or that were part of the survey, the mental health survey, I think are really similar barriers to employment services as well. And when looking at some of the work that our employment organizations are doing, it's things that we most want to tackle when it comes to, housing, transportation, mental health. So I think I could probably pass it off at this point.
Hi, yes, hi everyone. Thanks, Julia. I apologize. I wasn't on camera before. I was actually driving, coming from the airport, and my flight had been delayed. So thank you for your understanding that I'm here. And it was great to hear Julia introduce NYEC, and I was able to, without too much danger, read a little bit of the chats while I was driving. That's not something that I would ever advise. And but I did see some of your answers to your questions around barriers, and want to kind of dig into that a little. Julia did a beautiful job. Thank you, Julia, for talking about our three main areas of work that are, really our policy and advocacy, which is quite extensive and growing. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit more in depth around that. And also, like a lot of our projects around capacity building and sort of, supporting the field, supporting practitioners like you guys out there in the field, which I feel like we can never do enough of that. And the work you all do is not always easy. And I'm guessing that we don't have billionaires in the crowd here. So a lot of it is a labor of love, and hopefully you're enjoying the work that you're doing. One of our main goals is really to think about how we can make your lives easier. And I know Pathway Consultants, Amanda and Shauna, I know that that's also what they're helping you with as well, and really talking to each other and convening. So where we can, offer connections and ideas from other parts of the country, we really want to facilitate that as well. So I have a little bit of a question for everyone. How many of you have heard of the CHIPS Act? I'm gonna just put it in the chat. Yeah, I know what that
And Mimi, we didn't do the poll yet.
Yeah, okay, so I wasn't sure if the poll in the beginning, what are the barriers most prominent?
No, we haven't done the official poll. That was more like what magic wand.
Oh, okay. So the one that they're ranking things. Right. Okay.
That's right.
No, I know. Okay. Not quite ready for that, but yeah, I just want to see. In a minute, we definitely should do that, but anybody want to just not familiar? I have, okay. Anybody else? CHIPS Act, limited knowledge. Yeah, it's kind of it's something that's been out there, but I think a lot of folks don't know exactly what it is. And then probably a lot more of you have heard of the infrastructure funding that's available, and the Infrastructure Act that is funding new jobs. That's a little bit more, I think, out there than the CHIPS Act. But wanted to kind of, share with you a few things on our policy front that we've been looking at. And, to both the Infrastructure Act and the CHIPS Act have a great deal of funding in them for workforce. And there is not, though, specific carve outs necessarily in the states where these projects are happening, or the cities where these are happening, that are specific to young people, unless the people that are bidding on these contracts and they're including it in their proposals. So that's one of the things that, just working with local folks and, having a familiarity of like what these things are, there's a lot of potential funding that's out there. I saw in the chat when they were asked about barriers, a few people mentioned the funding streams, how we would want to increase funding streams. I think, somebody else said something about, young people don't know all the different careers that are out there. And, like, how do we bring that knowledge to them? And these two things, infrastructure and the CHIPS Act, I think that are two things that really we would love to, share with you more about that, not only, a little bit here, but also, through some of our workshops that we do that will be specific to that. So we can circle back when we have those. So yeah, so let me kind of frame this, and then I really want to hear from you, and we can do the poll. So some of our priorities right now are, with the CHIPS Act and the infrastructure dollars that are out there, it's really federal funding, but that it's going into the states and to communities. So, in terms of, creating those connections, it really is incredibly helpful to have that collaboration on the community level, and to have, an existing system for young people that are our opportunity talent, our opportunity youth. And what I've, been doing this work for a couple of years, that you heard in my bio, which was very extravagant, that bio. Thank you for that. That, I come from working in homelessness. And, one of the frustrations that I had in working in homelessness was connecting to the workforce system and to youth employment programs for young people experiencing homelessness. And when this opportunity presented itself with the National Youth Employment Coalition, I thought, oh, okay, I'm gonna go in and try to figure that out, like how we can get more youth employment opportunities for youth experiencing homelessness, and, all the disconnected youth out there. And, I've also, though, pretty quickly, understood that the funding has been limited investments in the last 20 years into youth employment programs on the federal level. So I think, one thing that I really came away with is there's some great programs that are out there, but they are often disconnected from other things. And there's also a lot of good youth homelessness programs that are disconnected from other, youth employment programs. And so a lot of the youth work that happens in excellent, could be excellent programs. But we're often, I think, program rich and systems poor. And if you're a young person navigating through, trying to reduce your barriers and to figure out, housing, and I know somebody else mentioned in the chat room, trauma is one of the biggest challenges, and you might be, have some trauma that you need to work through. And, you also need transportation. Then, trying to do all of that in a siloed kind of system can be really difficult. So one of the things that, we are really trying to advance, and I know the Department of Labor is also trying to advance, is like, how do we create those youth ecosystems so that if you're, like a client-centered system, so if a young person needs assistance on whatever, then how are we connecting them to the things that they need? And how do practitioners and, community leaders and, executive directors, how do they know what all those resources are and who to call? We're not very good at that, it turns out, as a country. And, so one of the things that we are really, prioritizing for this year and, the years to come is to help building those ecosystems. And to think about what is, and we're calling it our youth champion communities. And we're starting off with mayors. And like right now we have 7 mayors, as well as like experts from around the country to help us envision what does it look like to be a youth champion community? What does it look like for a young person that is disconnected from school or work, or is transitioning from foster care, or has justice involvement that they're struggling with in terms of getting training or education? Whoever those youth are, how are we as communities making it easier and making things work for them? I don't think, I think we're still far away from having a community where we could say like, they do it right, they're awesome. But we really are like bringing together all these different ideas and visions and research and data to be able to really think about, okay, how do we create this? How do we measure it? How do we know who the young people are? Because we talk about these big numbers of disconnected youth, but we often don't actually know who they are. And so what are our systems for developing that knowledge and then being able to understand how to connect with them and get them what they need to be able to thrive? So it's a big project, but we've got some great cities that are helping us in this beginning kind of brainstorming process. But we're also always looking for new ideas and innovative programs and, collaborations that exist. So I just want to put that out to you. We're going to be doing a bunch of visioning sessions for, different populations of youth that, might have unique needs. And good question. Any California cities? We had some California cities on the list, but the ones that were on the list, the mayors were going to be, their term was going to be done. That said, we work really closely with, we have members in Sacramento and Los Angeles, all over California. So California is definitely going to be involved. We want to have, you know, folks involved in all of these individual visioning sessions. And then we're going to roll out the framework in March, and then be able to hopefully have California cities participate in implementing parts of the framework to move towards becoming a youth champion city. So stay tuned. We're going to do this at our annual forum. We have, you know, some of the cities that we do have are Atlanta, San Antonio, Phoenix. We've got Scranton, Pennsylvania, smaller cities, and Louisville, Indianapolis. So kind of like a smattering of sort of medium cities, large cities, and smaller cities that are part of this initial visioning. But then we're really going to roll out the framework and hopefully have all kinds of cities join. So I just wanted to share all that with you, because one of the things, you know, today that I thought would be awesome is to be able to, you know, have you guys share some of, you know, what your challenges are. We, you know, really want to understand from you for both our federal policy work and also for this framework, you know, what are those things that you see young people grappling with the most? And I'm going to stop there. And I think can we do the poll, the official poll now?
All right. Rank the following barriers from greatest to least on frequency. These barriers are experienced by the youth in your programs. Tell us what your young people are experiencing. And if there is another category, like something that's not on here, a barrier that is significant with the young people that you're serving, put it in the chat, because it's just, you know, categories of things that we came up with. I remember, Mimi, we're in California, so some of our we have significant challenges here that are unique in the country, the housing.
Yeah, I think if we control for a little bit of variation, it does look like housing is one of the strongest, but mental health is really the biggest challenge, it looks like. If we're, you know, reading this correctly. But it looks like, yeah, so all you folks, not a lot of insignificant challenges here. And then did we have anything other put in the chat?
Tanya put financial. You want to say a little bit more, Tanya, what you mean by financial? Like just like not enough money for how much everything costs, or is there something more nuanced that you want to share?
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. Just having financial, like low income families that can't afford to live in the state or provide food or pay their bills.
Yeah, the income inequality. Pablo says we have at least 6 requests for housing assistance a month with a total participant roster of 275. We're in LA.
So,
and then there's all the people that didn't say something, that are, you know, staying on people's couches, you know, couch surfing, that are floating but haven't asked yet.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for that, Pablo and Tanya, and for everybody for taking this poll. You know, I've come from working in programs and doing direct service and running a lot of programs and working to support people on a statewide basis. I'm here in the state of Connecticut, and it's amazing. I've done a lot of national work around youth as well. It's amazing how consistent some of the barriers are across communities. We often see, you know, we've done kind of informal polls and, you know, talked to a lot of people. We often see transportation being the #1 barrier, and particularly if, you know, it's for any rural communities, but housing, you know, it's housing, transportation, mental health, identification is a huge one. slash documentation, and then, you know, justice involvement, as well. There is, I think a lot of interesting things kind of starting to percolate around the collaboration between workforce partners and housing partners. I think that, California has been, one of the if I can say it, most cursed in terms of housing challenges. And that has been an ongoing thing for many years now. I think that in some ways also because of that, there tends to be some innovation around that type of collaboration. And we have been running a community of practice for workforce partners and homeless services, and we're going to be coming out with a report and doing some work to really understand, like, how do we do better in terms of providing housing for young people that are showing up in our workforce systems, or, in Pablo's case, the LA Conservation Corps, what is the problem solving, and what are the resources that are available on that side of things. And then, for young people that are living in a shelter, living under a bridge, couch surfing, what are those connections to career pathways that could, number one, sometimes, using career pathways can be a preventative measure for homelessness if somebody's, able to have a job and have those resources to prevent episodes of homelessness. But certainly one of our struggles when I was working in homelessness, we could get the housing for the young person, but they weren't able to always keep it because they didn't have a good paying job. So I think that's going to be something that's going to continue to grow in terms of, programming. And I'd love to hear, these are crisis and pending homelessness requests. I'd love to hear from anybody who wants to put in the chat if they've done some innovative work on that. I think that probably other people would be interested in that as well. Problem solving within a community. There, have been various programs that exist that in both the workforce system, but also in homelessness services to address that. And, one of the, in my bio, we talked about in Connecticut, the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness, we had a youth homelessness demonstration program grant that I know California has some of these scattered across the state, and that is specifically for young people. And I'm just, do folks know what the YHDP program or youth homelessness demonstration programs are? Can you just weigh in? Let me know, because if you don't, that is maybe Julia. I don't know, Julia, if you can find kind of a link to this on the HUD website, but it's a project that HUD rolled out maybe like 6 years ago now, to really talk about, to really get communities to work together around ending youth homelessness. And they invested, funding into doing this, but they also required that the homelessness services or whoever was applying for this grant had partners to be able to work on job acquisition, help young people with workforce things, career pathways. And there's some funding in those projects to be able to do that. So we have seen in some of the communities and in our communities of practice, some really good collaboration between workforce systems and homeless services on a community level, that referrals go back and forth, where there's like a systematic way of sharing.
We have the continuums of care here, where we coordinate housing and homeless services, but workforce development isn't necessarily a consistent partner in the continuums of care.
Right. So something to think about is getting involved in those continuums of care, because there are mandates from HUD for certain types of involvement, and if there are YHDP programs in your community, part of that is youth workforce, and yeah, so there is some funding that could possibly be there for you, and there's also possibilities of applying for grants for these YHDP programs, even if you're not necessarily a homelessness service provider. I'm just saying. So that's, a little bit around housing and homelessness. Like, this is an ongoing thing. It's one of the things I just wanted to share with you all too, because, I know it looks like you have a lot of requests coming in directly to you. You're seeing, housing crises in the youth that you're serving. One of the very effective things that we did in Connecticut was to have what was called a diversion conversation or problem solving conversation, and having some flexible funding available combined with some support services for those young people. And 50% of the young people that were presenting for shelter, that were at shelter door, were able to be diverted. And then we also tracked very closely how many of them, came back into homelessness. And it was less than 10%. I think it was around 8% that came back into seeking services for housing. So it's anybody can kind of do that problem solving conversation. Sometimes those, like, I've trained people in school systems, in hospitals, social workers in hospitals that had people experiencing homelessness. Like, how do you problem solve around housing and figure out alternatives to going into a shelter? And with a little bit of funding, flex funding, it can be a really successful thing to do. So yeah, so I just wanted to share that. But that's the kind of thing, like, we're also doing things around transportation, and we're trying to, kind of problem solve and bring best practices together for the different barriers that you all are talking about. And I just want to pause there, because I want to see if there's any questions or any thoughts on anything so far.
Pablo added in the chat, here in LA, there are workforce development programs operating out of the county and city departments that deal with homelessness. Referrals to housing services are part of these grants deliverables. That's great, that coordination.
Yeah, thanks, Pablo. I think that LA, and I know Mayor Bass is very, very interested in doing better around this. And I've heard her speak at a couple of the U.S. Conference of Mayors conferences. And I think that, she's really moving forward with some innovative things, like, hey, why are we doing this if it's not working, right? Yeah, there is also, I think there's been talk in Los Angeles about prioritizing youth experiencing homelessness within the workforce system. And so that would be, something that, doesn't often happen in other places.
Yeah, we've had a lot of interruption, and, we have a 1 to 2 year program, right? The core does. It's really the core of our program. The center of our program is a year long, but we see a lot of core members leaving and not completing our program or not getting around to the job placement, and, you know, the things that happen after a while because it's homelessness and just not being able to make a living in the city and having to figure something else out, or just completely dropping out and not communicating with us anymore.
Yeah.
So that's a barrier to our program. But I know that, you know, LA Rise, which is like our big workforce investment program, is really, it's deepened. This year, those connections have deepened under Mayor Bass's influence.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Pablo. I think that yeah, I think there's a lot of room for growth around, you know, best practices around this. And I think that, again, LA, you know, because it is such a, you know, huge issue, we also tend to see innovation there first. So it's interesting, you know, and also just to note that, you know, the wages for like the conservation corps that are out there, you know, that's also part of our policy agenda, is to, you know, make the case for increasing wages so that they are living wages for the work that they do. Julia had mentioned the our NYEC, which is our National Alliance of Youth and Young Adult Advocates. We partnered, one of our core group partners in that is the CORE network. And so we do a lot of partnering around, you know, advocating for green jobs for youth, good paying jobs for youth, you know, in the environmental sector, to be able to, you know, address, you know, those kinds of things. So yes, we love more voices too in our policy committee. So if you have any interest, Pablo or others. Okay.
What was that acronym? NYEC? I'm sorry, I asked Julia for help because I'm like, acronyms.
Julia, do you want to put it in the chat?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. I'll write it out.
So yeah, it's still a relatively new group, but the thinking behind that is that, you know, we have a lot of, I mean, we have a fair amount of advocates in the opportunity youth space, and folks that are working on policy, you know, in DC and beyond. You all have the COIN network, which has been very active as well. We work closely with them. But we also see like everybody has their own federal policy agenda, and they're all talking to kind of the same people. And so our thinking was, you know, with our partners, is let's bring this together so that we can have a much louder voice and we can align the asks. And so we have been developing sort of a policy hub to be able to really raise awareness about opportunity youth to a much higher degree. Many of the policy makers still do not know about opportunity youth, and you would hope that they do, but that is one of the things that we are trying to change with all of our partners. So I can talk more about that. We're focused on mental health and kind of coming up with a joint agenda on mental health. Julia had mentioned, you know, our survey and, you know, some of the findings from that. One of the things that, you know, really did make a difference was having that, you know, screening tool, especially a screening tool for non-clinicians, to be able to capture whether, you know, a young person needs additional supports, whether it's peer counseling, you know, or, you know, something, you know, a psychiatrist or whatever that is, to be able to at least start that, you know, process. And, you know, if you look at the survey, it's pretty, I guess it was pretty shocking to me how few workforce development places had any kind of screening tools. And we really truly are in a youth mental health crisis, and the statistics are heartbreaking. You can read our report. You guys seem to be also living it. That was your number one challenge that you submitted, is mental health. So we are going to be, working with the Department of Labor and bringing in some experts to try to figure out, like, what would a standardized version of a screening process look like.
Maybe JR from Leaders Up has his hand up.
Okay, great. JR, I'm trying to find you on here.
I just came on camera, maybe that helped there too. But no, this is awesome. I'm like sitting back trying to take in all the information as well. And I just had it's kind of a random question. It was something that I was thinking about particularly because when we talk about opportunity to youth, and we define the top range is like, is it 24? 24 is the top range, I believe. Anyway, I think in our work that we've been seeing is that oftentimes it's even being like people even older than like what we define as opportunity youth, but are still have the same characteristics and the same need as opportunity youth, even if we like really go up to 30. Like we at Leaders Up, we focus in on BIPOC talent and opportunity youth as well, but we go beyond just the traditional ages of what that's why I had a mind gap around what the technical parameters are, because we service all the way up to, or our target, I should say, is all the way up to 29. If people come in older, we're not turning them away. We're still going to try to make that connection or provide them to a resource if that's within our capability. But I'm just wondering, as anybody else, or is that even a part of the conversation of looking at maybe expanding the terms of what opportunity youth is really classified as, or, again, sort of this asset mapping and sharing of resources to still meet the same need? I'm just curious, are the places that you all are having these conversations, has that come up any?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of conversations around like, okay, what's the population we're focusing on? The 16 to 24, probably you hear the most. But I often say 14 to 26, because of just the things that you're saying. And I think that that's really important. I know in Europe, they often it's thought of to 30. And there's other, places where, young people are up until 30, or transitioning, starting out in a career, starting out like figuring it out. I think that the issue is in terms of like eligibility to participate in a federally funded program, that there are a lot of programs that are already stretched very, very thin, right? So if they're stretched very, very thin, to add up to 30, I think that you guys would probably agree that there, one of the issues, and I saw this in your initial feedback in the chat, is, how do we really connect with the hard to connect with youth? That outreach and engagement piece is so, I think, challenging, but just incredibly vital for us to think about new ways to do that. And I worry a little bit, like if we, expand the age range too much, that some of the hardest to reach and engage, who really need that additional supports and relentless outreach, that those funds are going to be stretched too thin, and we're going to have even less of that.
Yeah.
I'm with you. If we had all the money in the world, I'd say let's start in kindergarten to prevent disconnection and be very intentional about it before kindergarten, really track how everybody's doing up to the age of 35 or 40, make sure everybody's okay, right?
Yeah.
But it's
I,
tricky.
yeah, I'll just add a quick nuance. Another part that that I just on my mind of what I've been thinking about recently, and I'll let other people get in here too. But to answer your question about the outreach part, Snapchat is the answer. That's all I'm gonna say about that. Like, get into about Snapchat is the answer. I heard this random fact yesterday. Snapchat is averaging 90% of usage between people of the ages between 13 and 24. In 20 countries, it's 90% of usage is between the ages of 13 to 24 in Snapchat. I don't have the specific country breakdown. We can look that up later. But nonetheless, that blew my mind. That's like 2 Chicago's, 6 San Francisco's, 12 Miami's, just worth of people on Snapchat within our target demographic. And I know a lot of us aren't on there in the organization's capacity, all the other stuff. But anyway, the other nuance, though, back to the point of what I've been thinking about is when we even break down the ages of opportunity youth, I'm seeing like differences in maybe that, you know, if you want to start on the lower end of 14 to early 20s versus your like, you know, your 23s or 24 all the way to like your 30, your later 20s size, and sort of the challenges and the necessary nuances and resources. So they're still being kind of looped in, but even that nuance of the transition within the opportunity youth space is something that I think isn't getting enough sort of attention. And like when we're really thinking about the assets and the tools that we can then eventually scale to really drive practice change or meet their needs and being applied, I think that's something else that we've been thinking about a lot of leaders up and how we you know, impact that area as well. So thank you for the conversation and the resources. I'm going to take some time and go through them as well. So just wanted to share that.
Yeah, JR, thank you. Really insightful. And yeah, just to echo what you said, we did a employer engagement project actually in Los Angeles and New Orleans that we're just wrapping up. But one of the most consistent things that we heard in both communities was that, you know, the school systems really need to get involved in terms of preventing disconnection in and bringing in more exposure to all the different career pathways that are out there, and really, you know, helping young people kind of navigate that. And, you know, I think that, you know, that we're in a time period in our lives right now. Mine's longer than a lot of your lives. I've been around for a while. That I've never seen before, where the opportunity to talk to employers in your community, you know, employers are listening. They are like, I've had so many people was like, what do we need to do? Tell us what we need to do so that we can do it to hire young people. You know, I would tell them, you know, and one of the things is getting your employers to go into your school system and start talking to young people about all the different types of careers that they have. And that's kind of like a foot in the door, that if you get them kind of hooked into getting to know these young people, there's a good chance that they're going to be good partners in hiring them and retaining them as well. So just sharing that, you know, it's a way to start with, you know, young people younger. This is funny in the chat. I'm seeing this TikTok versus Snapchat, and Julia is the boss of me on social media.
I am. And I love TikTok. I haven't exactly figured out how NYEC would necessarily fit into having a TikTok page, but if I think of a way to make it useful, we would be on TikTok. I also get a lot of my information from there. So
great idea though. And I don't know if who put that in there? Emmanuel and Jovan. You know, we've heard about geofencing, and you guys might be like, oh, I know what that is. You know, I did not know what that was a couple of years ago, but that's one thing that has also been used is, you know, trying to advertise to people like if there's a particular concert in town that there's probably going to be a lot of young people, to be able to kind of, you know, connect with them through social media there. And that's been used, I think, very successfully in San Antonio. Yeah, JR, anybody who's got like cool TikTok videos you want to like share some insights on after, you know, we are off this call, I'd love to see what folks are doing. And I think that it's a great venue. And Snapchat, I'd never used. I use my teens as a sounding board. So good, Shauna. Yeah, I don't think there's anything should be produced or put out there into the world without, you know, young people leading the way. I did a project with 211, you know, the United Way 211 service. And it was here in the state of Connecticut, but I looked and they didn't really have any youth specific resource pages. Young people were saying that when they called 211, they weren't getting connected, you know, in the right way, just, you know, kind of random. So we had a youth, you know, team of young people do a youth participatory research project to, I'm not advising this. I hate that this is being recorded right now, but I'm going to share with you. Please don't get me in trouble. But, you know, the young people were kind of trying to figure out like how they can capture information about what happens when you called 211. And this was years ago. So they called with fake situations and then recorded like what actually happened and whether they got the help they needed. And then they ended up putting this research project together and presenting to the heads of the state agencies about how it needs to be improved. And to United Way's credit, they took that and revised all kinds of things based on their feedback. So yeah, it's investigative reporting. Thank you, JR.